Hannah moved through the med bay with a practiced grace, her hands steady as she adjusted the flow of saline for a Sullian miner whose translucent skin shimmered under the harsh lights. The air smelled of antiseptic, and the soft hum of medical scanners formed a constant backdrop. Hannah had grown used to the cacophony of the station's infirmary, the low groans of the injured, the rhythmic beeping of monitors, the murmured reassurances she offered to patients. She had been stationed here for almost 3 years now, tending to all species aboard the Elysium space station. It was a floating nexus of trade and politics, a hub where humans, Sullians, and the domineering Carrack coexisted under the thin veneer of order. But today, the air was different, taut as a wire strung too tight. "Move!" A bellow echoed down the corridor, followed by the unmistakable thud of heavy boots. Hannah turned, her jaw tightening. 3 Carrack enforcers lumbered into the med bay, their massive frames barely fitting through the doorway. Armor plates gleamed dully beneath the fluorescent lights, and their feline eyes glowed like twin suns. They dragged a bloodied human man between them, his legs trailing limp. "Out of the way, nurse!" the lead enforcer snarled, his sharp teeth bared. Hannah held her ground, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. "He's injured. Let me treat him." The lead Carrack, a hulking brute named Vrex, sneered down at her. "This human is a thief. He doesn't deserve your pity." Hannah's eyes flicked to the man. His face was a mask of bruises and blood, his breathing shallow. The badge on his chest marked him as a maintenance worker, one of the invisible workers who kept the station running smoothly. "What did he steal?" Hannah demanded, forcing her voice to remain steady. Vrex's grin widened. "Information." "That's not a crime that warrants a beating," Hannah said, her pulse drumming in her ears. "He needs medical attention." Vrex stepped forward, and Hannah's spine stiffened as the scent of iron and sweat assaulted her nostrils. "You think you can tell me what to do, little nurse?" A knot of fear tightened in Hannah's stomach, but she refused to back down. "You brought him to the med bay. Let me do my job." For a moment, the room seemed to hold its breath. The other 2 Carrack watched silently, their golden eyes flicking from Vrex to Hannah. Then Vrex laughed, a sound that echoed like a hammer striking an anvil. "Fine," he said, shoving the unconscious man toward her. Hannah caught him, staggering under his weight. "But don't get too comfortable, nurse. You humans forget your place too easily." With a final sneer, Vrex turned, motioning for the others to follow. Hannah exhaled a slow, controlled breath, her heart pounding in her ears. She lowered the man onto a nearby cot, her hands moving with mechanical precision as she scanned his injuries. Multiple fractures. Internal bleeding. The Carrack had been thorough. "Hang on," she whispered, brushing a lock of hair from the man's forehead. "You're going to be all right." But as she worked, the tension in the air thickened. Moments later, the door slid open again, and Hannah's stomach dropped. Vrex had returned, his amber eyes glinting with cruel amusement. "Thought about what you said, nurse," he drawled, leaning against the doorframe. "And I realized something. You need a reminder of your place too." Before Hannah could react, he lunged. The first blow slammed into her gut, forcing the air from her lungs. Pain shot through her torso, and she doubled over, gasping. Vrex grabbed a fistful of her hair, yanking her head back so she was forced to look up at him. "You like defending these worthless scum?" Vrex snarled, his hot breath washing over her face. "Let's see you defend yourself." He released her, and Hannah crumpled to the floor. She tried to rise, but a heavy boot crashed into her ribs, and she felt something crack. Stars exploded behind her eyes, and the taste of blood filled her mouth. Somewhere nearby, the unconscious maintenance worker groaned, his eyes fluttering open. Vrex glanced down at him, then back at Hannah. "You should thank me," Vrex said, his voice cold and taunting. "I'm teaching you both a valuable lesson." Another kick, and Hannah's world dissolved into a blur of pain and muffled sounds. The ground felt cold beneath her cheek, and every breath was a struggle. Darkness fringed her vision, and she could hear the Carrack laughing as they walked away, their boots pounding like war drums against the metal floor. Time blurred. When Hannah finally opened her eyes, The med bay was empty, the silence oppressive. She forced herself to sit up, her ribs screaming in protest. Blood trickled down her temple, and the room swayed around her. "Hannah!" The voice was soft, achingly familiar. Ryu knelt beside her, his dark eyes wide with fear and barely contained rage. His hands hovered over her, not touching, as if afraid she would shatter beneath his fingertips. I'm okay," Hannah whispered, though the words tasted like a lie. Ryu's jaw clenched, the muscles in his neck taut. "Who did this?" Hannah swallowed, the memory of Vrex's sneer flashing through her mind. Carrick enforcers. Vrex and his men. They said the worker was a thief. When I tried to help, they... Ryu closed his eyes, his chest rising and falling with slow, controlled breaths. Hannah knew that look. It was the look he wore when he was trying to restrain a storm that threatened to break free. "Let me help you up," Ryu said, his voice tight. He slipped an arm around her shoulders, lifting her with a gentleness that brought fresh tears to her eyes. Every step sent a jolt of pain through her ribs, but she leaned into Ryu, drawing strength from his presence. They made it to the examination cot, and Ryu eased her down, his movements deliberate and careful. His eyes roamed over her injuries, noting every bruise, every abrasion, every place where the Carrick had left their mark. "Stay here," he said, his tone flat, emotionless. "Ryu." Hannah caught his wrist, her fingers trembling. "Please. Don't do anything rash." Ryu met her gaze, and in that moment, the softness that usually filled his eyes was gone. In its place was a dark, impenetrable calm that sent a shiver down Hannah's spine. "I won't," he said, his voice a hollow echo. But as he pulled away, Hannah's grip slipped, and she felt the absence of his touch like a sudden, brutal cold. Ryu stood, his back straight, his fists clenched at his sides. The quiet technician was gone. In his place was a man Hannah had never truly met, a man who moved with lethal, predatory grace as he walked out the door. Hannah's breath hitched, her pulse fluttering like a trapped bird. The air felt heavy, oppressive, and in the silence that followed, only one thought echoed through her mind. They had no idea who they had just provoked. Ryu moved through the corridors with a singular purpose, each step a controlled release of tension coiled tight within him. The lights overhead flickered as he passed, shadows chasing the grim set of his jaw. The scent of disinfectant lingered in his nostrils, mingling with the coppery tang of Hannah's blood that still stained his shirt. He could still hear her ragged breaths, the low moans she tried to stifle as he gently bound her ribs. Each sound echoed in his skull, a relentless reminder of what they had done to her. Ahead, the corridor forked, one path leading to the maintenance bay, the other to the sleeping quarters. Ryu paused, his jaw tight. To the untrained eye, he appeared to be nothing more than a wiry technician, thin, unobtrusive, hands calloused from years of repair work. But in his mind, old instincts were awakening, shaking free of the dust he had buried them beneath. He turned sharply to the right, heading toward their quarters. Each step brought a memory, unbidden and vivid, of his old life. The mountain air was crisp, biting against his skin as he knelt in the courtyard of the Kage temple, the scent of incense and blood mingling beneath the moonlight. Master Daichi stood over him, a shadow against the night, his voice low and steady. "A warrior who acts in anger is a weapon without a hand," Daichi said, his dark eyes glinting. "But a warrior who acts in purpose is unstoppable." Ryu had bowed, his knuckles scraping against the cold stone floor. "Yes, master." Now, as he entered the quarters he shared with Hannah, Ryu released a shuddering breath. The room was small, utilitarian, a narrow cot, a metal table, a single chair. Hannah's coat lay draped over the back of the chair, a smear of blood marring the collar. Ryu's fists clenched, the knuckles white. He moved to the storage cabinet, sliding the door open with a soft hiss. Beneath stacks of neatly folded maintenance uniforms lay a small, unassuming wooden box. Ryu knelt, his breath fogging the air as he carefully lifted the lid. Inside, black cloth gleamed like oil beneath the artificial light. The suit was pristine, the fabric supple and dark, absorbing every flicker of illumination. Beside it lay a pair of gloves, a set of sheathed kunai, and a simple, unmarked mask. Ryu reached for the mask, his fingertips grazing its cool surface. The last time he had worn it was 2 years ago, on the day he had walked away from the Kage clan. He had promised Hana he was done with that life, that he would leave the shadows behind and learn to live in the light. But Hana was lying broken in a med-bay cot, her eyes haunted, her body bruised. And the Carrick enforcers walked the station with impunity, laughing, jeering, leaving chaos in their wake. Ryu closed his eyes, breathing deep, feeling the weight of the mask in his hands. Back in the med-bay, Hana struggled to sit up. Every breath sent sharp, stabbing pains through her side, but she clenched her jaw, forcing herself to focus. The maintenance worker lay on the cot opposite her, his eyes half-lidded, the bruises darkening beneath his skin. What happened?" he croaked, his gaze unfocused. "You were beaten," Hana said, her voice hoarse. "By the Carrick. You're safe now." The man grimaced, shifting, and a low moan escaped his lips. They said I stole data. But I didn't. I swear." Hana nodded, her hands shaking as she reached for a damp cloth. Guilt gnawed at her insides. The Carrick had done this because she dared to stand up to them. And Ryu. Her heart lurched. Ryu. Something cold and heavy coiled in her gut. The look in his eyes before he left. She hadn't seen that expression since the day she met him, bleeding and delirious in the outer sectors of New Kyoto. He had been half dead, his body riddled with shrapnel and burns. Hana had found him on her way back from the medical ward, his eyes glazed, his breath rasping. She'd taken him in, nursed him back to health, never asking where he had come from or why his body bore the marks of a dozen different weapons. Later, when he was strong enough to speak, he told her his name was Ryu. Just Ryu. No past, no future. A man without a clan. But even then, Hana had known. The way he moved, silent as smoke. The way his eyes tracked every exit in a room, every shadow. And the scars, dozens of them, etched across his skin like a map of violence. Now, as she lay on the cold cot, pain radiating through her bones, Hana's chest tightened. The man she had tried to save stirred, his eyes fluttering closed. The air was thick with antiseptic and dread. Ryu stood in front of the mirror, the mask held loosely in one hand. His reflection stared back at him, gaunt and unrecognizable. He hadn't worn the mask in years. The last time he had put it on, the air had been thick with smoke and the cries of his enemies. His fingers trembled as he lifted it to his face, the world narrowing to the eye slits, the air cool against his skin. The suit slipped over his shoulders like a second skin, the fabric tightening around his muscles, old instincts thrumming to life beneath it. Ryu breathed in, his chest expanding, then exhaled slowly, allowing the years to melt away. Gone was the quiet technician. Gone was the devoted husband. In his place stood Kage, the shadow. The Carrick's barracks were on the lower levels, a labyrinthine complex guarded by thick, steel-plated doors and biometric scanners. But Ryu knew the layout. He had memorized it months ago, out of habit, mapping every exit, every vent, every blind spot. The old man in him would have walked away. But Kage was already moving, slipping through the ventilation shaft like a wraith, his breaths measured and silent. Below, Carrick enforcers lounged around a table, their voices echoing through the chamber. Vrex sat at the head, his legs propped up, a smug grin stretching across his feline face. "And the nurse?" one of them asked, cracking his knuckles. "You really showed her." Vrex laughed, his fangs flashing. "Taught her what happens when humans forget their place." A blade whispered free of its sheath. Ryu's eyes narrowed behind the mask, his heart a steady, controlled beat. He could strike now, swift and deadly, and leave a trail of bodies in his wake. But Hana's face swam before his eyes, her voice echoing in his mind. "Please, don't do anything rash." Ryu sheathed the blade, his jaw clenched. Master Daichi's words echoed in his mind. A warrior who acts in anger is a weapon without a hand. For a moment, the impulse to strike remained, sharp as a blade against his skin. But he forced it down, breathing through the tension, forcing the bloodlust to dissipate. This wasn't the time. Not yet. Without a sound, he slipped back into the shadows, his presence a mere ripple in the air. The Carrick enforcers continued to laugh, oblivious to the phantom that had watched them from the dark. Ryu moved through the ducts, his mind a whirl of calculations and strategies. Patience. Precision. Control. Back in their quarters, he knelt before the wooden box, his breath slowing. He removed the mask, his face pale, sweat slicking his brow. The old life had reawakened, but it had not consumed him. Not yet. The door hissed open. Hannah stood in the doorway, her face drawn and eyes rimmed with dark circles. "Ryu," she said, her voice small and fractured. Ryu met her gaze, his eyes dark and unfathomable. He opened his mouth to speak, but the words caught in his throat. Hannah moved closer, reaching for him, her fingers brushing the mask lying on the floor. "What have you done?" she whispered. Ryu closed his eyes, the scent of blood and antiseptic thick in his nostrils. "Nothing," he said, his voice raw. "Not yet." And in the silence that followed, the unspoken promise hung heavy between them, a storm gathering in the dark, waiting to be unleashed. The station's artificial night cycle cast the corridors in a dim, bruised glow. Ryu moved like a shadow, each step precise, each breath controlled. The black suit clung to him, a second skin that absorbed every flicker of light. His face was obscured by the mask, its expression blank and featureless, a void where his humanity had once been. In the silence, he was nothing. No husband, no technician, no man. Only the shadow, the blade, the echo of a life he had tried to bury. Ahead, the corridor split, one path leading to the barracks, the other to the armory. Ryu paused, his eyes scanning the walls, cataloging every camera, every sensor. The Carrick enforcers were arrogant, but they were not careless. Their base was fortified, and the guards were armed to the fangs. But they were not Kage. Ryu slipped into the ventilation shaft, the metal cool beneath his gloved hands. Inside, the air was stale, tinged with oil and ozone. He moved silently, each shift of his body calculated, each breath measured. Below, the muffled voices of the Carrick drifted up, their laughter a low, grating rumble. "You hear about the nurse?" a voice said, thick with contempt. "Vrex says she's still breathing. Tough little human." Another voice snorted. "Tough or stupid? Should have kept her mouth shut." A third voice, unmistakably Vrex's, rumbled, "Doesn't matter. She's learned her place now. And that technician she's shacked up with? Probably crying in a corner somewhere." Ryu's jaw tightened beneath the mask, the words sliding over him like acid. He breathed in, held it, released. This was not about anger. This was not about vengeance. This was about balance, about making them understand that even the smallest shadows could cut the deepest. He moved forward, the shaft narrowing as it led to the control room. A single Carrick sat inside, his back to the wall of monitors, feet propped up on a console. The screens flickered with feeds from across the station, storage bays, docking areas, the med bay. Ryu dropped soundlessly behind him, the blade glinting in his hand. Before the guard could even turn, Ryu's fist connected with his neck, striking the pressure point just beneath the jaw. The Carrick slumped, unconscious, the chair rolling back with a soft squeak. Ryu caught it, lowering it to the floor without a sound. With swift, fluid movements, he tied the guard's wrists and ankles, securing a strip of cloth around his mouth. The entire encounter had taken less than 5 seconds. Ryu's eyes scanned the monitors, locating Vrex's quarters. The commander sat inside, flanked by 2 enforcers. They were drinking, their heavy mugs clinking as they toasted to something Ryu couldn't hear. A slow, cold smile touched Ryu's lips beneath the mask. Vrex was exactly where he wanted him to be. Vrex leaned back in his chair, the heavy leather creaking beneath his weight. The amber liquid in his cup sloshed as he took a deep swig, his fangs bared in a smug grin. The other 2 Carrick laughed, their laughter echoing through the small, cramped quarters. "Did you see her face when I hit her?" Vrex said, his eyes gleaming. "Stupid little nurse didn't even know what hit her." The others snickered, one slapping the table, his claws raking across the surface. "Think she learned her lesson?" Vrex shrugged, taking another swig. "Maybe. But maybe we need to remind her again. Make sure she really understands her place." The room fell silent. Vrex's cup hovered halfway to his lips. A chill slithered through the air, palpable as a knife's edge. What the hell? The lights cut out, plunging the room into darkness. The emergency lamps flickered on, casting the space in a sickly red glow. Shadows stretched long and deep, twisting against the walls. Vrex rose, his muscles coiling. What's going on? No one answered. The two enforcers exchanged uneasy glances, hands moving to their sidearms. The door hissed open, and a figure stepped inside. Black from head to toe, his face an emotionless mask, Ryu stood in the doorway, his presence as silent and inevitable as a storm. The room seemed to shrink around him, the air thickening, pressing in. Vrex's eyes narrowed. "You lost, little man?" Ryu said nothing. He moved forward, each step deliberate, each movement controlled. One of the enforcers lunged, his fist swinging in a wild arc. Ryu sidestepped, his body flowing like water. The enforcer's momentum carried him forward, and Ryu's knee came up, striking him square in the gut. The air whooshed from the Carrick's lungs, and before he could recover, Ryu's elbow slammed into his neck, dropping him like a stone. The second enforcer snarled, claws extended, and lunged. Ryu ducked beneath the strike, his hand shooting up to catch the Carrick's wrist. With a twist, the bones snapped, and the enforcer howled, his arm hanging limp. Ryu's fist drove into his throat, silencing him instantly. Vrex remained standing, his cup forgotten, his eyes locked onto Ryu's mask. "You think you can walk in here and do this?" he snarled. "You have any idea who you're dealing with?" Ryu's head tilted, the mask's blank eyes reflecting Vrex's own panicked face. "You hurt my wife," Ryu said, his voice low, steady, calm. "Now you answer to me." Vrex charged, fists swinging. Ryu met him head-on, their bodies colliding with a sound like thunder. Vrex was stronger, bulkier, his muscles straining beneath his armor. But Ryu was faster, his movements a blur of strikes and counters, every motion precise, every blow calculated. Vrex's fist crashed into Ryu's shoulder, sending him staggering. Pain lanced through Ryu's arm, but he absorbed it, letting it flow through him, fueling his focus. Vrex lunged again, claws extended, but Ryu dropped low, sweeping his leg beneath Vrex's knees. The Carrick fell hard, the ground shaking beneath his weight. Ryu was on him in an instant, straddling his chest, his fist driving down. Once. Twice. Blood spattered the floor, Vrex's head snapping back, eyes rolling. Ryu grabbed Vrex by the throat, lifting his head until their faces were inches apart. "Do you remember her face?" he hissed. "Do you remember her voice when she begged you to stop?" Vrex's eyes fluttered, unfocused, his breath rattling. She was just a human. Just a... Ryu's grip tightened, his gloved fingers pressing into Vrex's windpipe. The Carrick gasped, his claws scrabbling weakly at Ryu's wrists. For a moment, Ryu felt the urge, the burning, blinding desire to crush, to silence, to end. But then Hannah's face flickered before him, her eyes soft, her hand warm against his cheek. The memory surged up like a wave, and Ryu released Vrex, shoving him back against the floor. Vrex coughed, his chest heaving, blood trickling from his lips. Ryu rose to his feet, the mask still in place, his breathing harsh but controlled. The two fallen enforcers groaned nearby, their bodies twisted and broken. Ryu turned without another word, his steps echoing through the corridor as he disappeared into the shadows. Behind him, Vrex's ragged breathing filled the air, each gasping sound a reminder of what he had unleashed. Ryu moved swiftly, his heart pounding. The fight was over, but the battle was not. The Carrick would not forget this. And neither would Hannah. Ryu slipped through the maintenance shafts, the mask still in place, the scent of blood still sharp in his nostrils. He had held back tonight, but the shadow in him was still awake, still hungry. And somewhere, deep within, he wondered how much longer he could keep it caged. The artificial dawn cycle cast a pale, sterile glow over the med bay. Hannah sat upright in the cot, her back against the cold wall, a thin blanket pulled tight around her shoulders. The bruises along her ribs throbbed with each breath, but the physical pain was nothing compared to the gnawing dread that coiled in her gut. She stared at the door, waiting for it to slide open, her mind replaying Ryu's expression before he left, that chilling calm, the dark determination that had replaced his usual gentle reserve. It was a look she had seen only once before, the day she found him bloodied and broken on the outskirts of New Kyoto. The maintenance worker lay across from her, his breathing even, his wounds wrapped in fresh bandages. The silence was oppressive, thick as fog, and Hana could almost hear the echo of Ryu's footsteps as he walked away. The door slid open. Hana's breath caught. Ryu stepped inside, his face drawn, shadows pooled beneath his eyes. He had changed into his standard uniform, the loose, gray tunic hanging off him as though it no longer fit. His hands were tucked into his pockets, but Hana could see the tension in his shoulders, the tightness in his jaw. Hana exhaled, the air shuddering from her lungs. "Are you hurt?" Ryu shook his head, his gaze flicking to the maintenance worker, then back to her. "You." "I'm fine," she said, her voice hollow. "Just bruised." Ryu moved closer, dropping to his knees beside her cot. For a moment, neither spoke. Hana reached out, brushing her fingers over his knuckles. His skin was cold, his fists clenched. "Did you?" she began, the question heavy, hanging between them. Ryu lowered his eyes, his jaw working. "I didn't kill them." Hana's shoulders sagged, relief and fear warring in her chest. "But you did something." Ryu's gaze remained fixed on the floor, his fingers tightening around hers. "They won't touch you again." The weight of his words pressed against Hana's chest, a solid, immovable force. She swallowed, her throat tight. "You said you left that life behind." "I did," Ryu said, his voice soft but firm. "I tried. But when I saw you lying there, when I saw what they did to you—" His eyes lifted, dark and haunted. "Something inside me woke up." Hana's fingers curled around his, her nails pressing into his skin. "And now—" Ryu's jaw clenched, a muscle jumping beneath his skin. "Now, they know what I'm capable of. They know what happens when they hurt you." The words hung between them, heavy as stone. Hana's chest tightened, and she pulled her hand away, her eyes searching his face. "You can't keep doing this." Ryu's expression hardened, the mask slipping back into place. "And what am I supposed to do? Let them beat you? Let them walk away laughing?" Hana flinched, the memory of Rex's cruel smile flashing through her mind. "No," she whispered. "But I don't want to lose you to that darkness. I don't want to lose the man I love." Ryu's face softened, the hard edges crumbling, and for a moment, the mask fell away. Beneath it, he was raw, exposed, a man caught between two worlds, each one demanding more than he could give. "I don't want to lose you either," he said, his voice breaking. "But if they touch you again, Hana, I don't know if I can hold back." Hana swallowed, her throat dry. The room seemed to close in around them, the walls pressing inward, the ceiling dipping low. "Ryu," she said, her voice a fragile thread. "Promise me you won't become what they think you are." Ryu's eyes glistened, and he nodded, a single solemn dip of his chin. "I promise." Outside the med bay, the station buzzed with tension. Whispers rippled through the corridors, eyes darted to shadows, guards patrolled in pairs. The Carrick enforcers were on edge, their faces tight, their jaws clenched. Rumors spread like wildfire. They said the enforcers had been attacked, beaten to within an inch of their lives by a ghost that moved like smoke. Some said it was a man, others said it was a monster. In the barracks, Vrex lay propped up on a cot, his face a swollen mass of bruises. His right arm was wrapped in a crude sling, his ribs tightly bandaged. A medic hovered nearby, dabbing a damp cloth against his split lip. A lieutenant stood beside the cot, his arms crossed, his eyes narrowed. "What happened, Vrex?" Vrex's jaw clenched, the movement sending a fresh wave of pain through his skull. "He came out of nowhere," he muttered, his voice thick and slurred. "1 minute we're drinking, next minute, he's there." "Who?" Vrex's eyes slid to the far corner. His pupils dilated. "The nurse's husband. The technician." He swallowed, his throat bobbing. But he's not just a technician. The lieutenant's eyes narrowed. What is he? Vrex's hands trembled against the cot, his fingers twitching. He's death. In their quarters, Hannah sat across from Ryu at the small metal table, 2 cups of tea steaming between them. The air was heavy, thick with unspoken words and the scent of chamomile. Ryu stared into his cup, the steam rising in soft, ghostly tendrils. Hannah watched him, her eyes searching, her heart aching. "Are you going to tell me what really happened?" she asked, her voice gentle. Ryu's hand tightened around the cup, the ceramic warm against his skin. "I didn't kill them," he said again, his voice a monotone. "I made sure they understood." Hannah nodded, her gaze dropping to her own hands, fingers wrapped tightly around the cup. "Understood what?" "That you're not to be touched," Ryu said, his eyes dark, unblinking. Hannah swallowed, the tea burning down her throat. "And what about you?" Ryu's jaw clenched, the muscles working beneath his skin. "What about me?" "If they come after you," Hannah said, her voice trembling, "what will you do then?" Ryu didn't answer. The silence stretched between them, heavy and oppressive, pressing down like a storm cloud. Hannah reached across the table, her fingers brushing his hand. "I love you," she said, her eyes shimmering. "But I can't love a ghost." Ryu's eyes flicked to hers, his gaze piercing, vulnerable. "I'm not a ghost," he said, his voice rough. "I'm still here." Hannah squeezed his hand, her fingers cool against his skin. "Then stay with me. Don't go back to that darkness. Don't become the thing they think you are." Ryu's eyes dropped to their entwined hands, his chest rising and falling in slow, measured breaths. The steam from the tea curled between them, a fragile barrier, a tenuous connection. Outside, the station lights flickered, the artificial day cycle shifting to dusk. Shadows stretched across the walls, long and dark, reaching toward them like grasping hands. But inside the small room, Hannah's hand remained wrapped around Ryu's, holding him in place, anchoring him to the present, to the light. And in that moment, Ryu closed his eyes, exhaling a slow, shuddering breath, and allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, he could stay.